No one in the Moretti mansion dared to breathe. The most feared man in the city was kneeling on the marble floor, his hands shaking as he wiped blood from a child's wrist. Not from an enemy's attack, not from a rival's revenge, from his own wife. The girl didn't cry. That was the part that shattered him. She stood there in silence, eyes lowered, as if pain had taught her that tears were dangerous. Behind them, the woman smiled, calm, beautiful, untouchable. Lorenzo Moretti had crushed men for less, burned empires for disrespect. Yet for 3 years, the real monster had lived under his roof, slept beside him, kissed his cheek every morning. And this wasn't the first time. What happens next will expose a secret hidden behind perfect walls, reveal how a child learned to fear love, and force a powerful man to choose between blood and the truth. Stay until the end. Because this story doesn't begin with violence, it begins with trust. Lorenzo Moretti believed he had already won at life. Power bowed to his name. Money followed his shadow. Men who once threatened his existence now crossed the street when they saw him coming. From the outside, his world looked untouchable, fortified by influence and fear. And at the center of it all stood what he considered his greatest victory, a family restored after loss, after the death of his first wife. Grief had hollowed him out in ways no enemy ever could. For years, the mansion felt like a museum of memories, too quiet, too empty. Then Isabella entered his life graceful, poised, devastatingly beautiful. She spoke gently. She smiled easily. Most importantly, she knelt to Maria Elena's height and promised to love her as her own. Lorenzo wanted to believe in miracles. So he did. What he never knew was that every time his car disappeared beyond the iron gates, a different version of his home came alive. A quieter one, a darker one that did not need raised voices to terrify. Maria Elena was 8 years old, and she had learned something no child should ever need to learn. Over the past 3 years, she had developed a skill sharper than any instinct Lorenzo had honed on the streets. She could recognize footsteps. She knew the sound of her father's shoes heavy, confident, unhurried. That sound meant safety, warm hands, laughter that ruffled her hair, the smell of leather and cologne that told her she could breathe again. And then there was the other sound, lighter, precise, always measured. Isabella's heels never hurried. They announced control. That sound meant silence, stillness, survival. The twist was cruel in its simplicity. Maria Elena had not called Isabella mother for a very long time. Not aloud, not even in her prayers. In her mind, Isabella had become something else entirely. Not a person, not family, just the other one. Children name monsters in ways adults never notice. Rosa Dequa, who had worked in the Moretti household for 6 years, began to notice the changes long before Lorenzo did. She noticed them in the smallest details, the ones that never made it into conversations or reports. Sleeves pulled down even in summer. The way Maria Elena stiffened when someone raised their voice, even in laughter. The way the child's eyes always searched a room before she spoke, as if measuring risk. But the most disturbing change was this: Maria Elena no longer cried out loud. When she scraped her knee, she bit her lip until it bled. When she was frightened, her tears fell silently, carefully, as though sound itself might be punished. Rosa had once found her alone in the bathroom, staring at her reflection, whispering apologies to herself for reasons she could not name. Rosa wanted to ask. She wanted to intervene, but Isabella had a way of smiling that warned without words. And Rosa, like everyone else in that house, knew who signed her paychecks. Isabella, to the world, was flawless. She hosted dinners with effortless charm, sat beside Lorenzo like a queen beside her king, and spoke of Maria Elena with practiced affection. She praised the child's manners, her discipline, her obedience. Words that sounded admirable until one noticed how thin the girl had become, how quiet, how small she tried to make herself. Lorenzo noticed none of it. He was too busy holding an empire together. On the same day Maria Elena learned not to cry when afraid, Lorenzo was sitting in a conference room across the city, signing papers that would decide the fate of men he would never look in the eye again. His voice was calm, his posture relaxed. The room obeyed him without question. This was the version of Lorenzo the city feared: a man who ruled with precision, not emotion. Between signatures, his phone buzzed. A missed call. Rosa's name flashed briefly on the screen before disappearing. He dismissed it without a second thought. Back at the mansion, Isabella stood at the top of the staircase, watching Maria Elena descend slowly, one step at a time, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The child's movements were careful, rehearsed. She did not run, she did not speak, she did not look up. "Remember," Isabella said softly, her voice silk wrapped around steel. "Good girls don't make noise." Maria Elena nodded. Inside her chest, something tightened. She wanted to tell her father how quiet the house became when he left, how even the walls seemed to listen. She wanted to ask him why love felt conditional now, why it seemed to disappear the moment he turned his back. But she had learned another rule, one Isabella never needed to say out loud. No one would believe her. That belief was not born from evidence. It was planted carefully, watered daily, until it grew roots too deep for a child to pull out. Maria Elena had watched Isabella smile at her father the same day she whispered cruelty into her ear. The contradiction taught her an important lesson: truth could be dangerous. So she adapted. She learned how to become invisible. That evening, Rosa watched Maria Elena eat dinner without lifting her eyes from the plate. The child thanked Isabella politely for the meal. She asked for permission before standing. She apologized when she did nothing wrong. Rosa's hands trembled as she cleared the table. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And somewhere across the city, Lorenzo Moretti leaned back in his chair, convinced that the walls he had built around his family were strong enough to protect them from anything. He had no idea that the greatest threat to his daughter did not come from rival families or hidden enemies. It came wrapped in elegance, in patience, in a smile that never reached the eyes. And while Lorenzo believed he was ruling the world, his little girl was learning how to survive one quiet step at a time. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Isabella Moretti understood something most people never did. Power did not always need to be loud. True control was quiet. It slipped into a room unnoticed, settled into habits, and convinced others it had always belonged there. From the outside, she was perfection itself. She accompanied Lorenzo to formal dinners, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile timed just right. She listened when powerful men spoke, laughed softly at their jokes, and never once challenged her husband in public. The city saw her as an elegant extension of Lorenzo's empire, a woman who softened his edges, who brought warmth to a man made of iron. At home, Isabella ruled with rules that sounded reasonable: discipline, structure, order, words that pleased Lorenzo whenever she used them. She spoke of Maria Elena as a child who needed guidance, boundaries, consistency. And Lorenzo, still carrying guilt for the years he had spent building his empire instead of being present, wanted to believe her. What he did not see was how carefully Isabella adjusted her behavior depending on who was watching. When Lorenzo was home, Isabella's voice stayed gentle. She brushed out Maria Elena's hair, complimented her posture, praised her obedience. She encouraged the girl to show her drawings to her father, then smiled proudly as if she were the one who had inspired them. Maria Elena learned quickly when it was safe to breathe, but when Lorenzo left, the air changed. Isabella never shouted at first. She corrected. She sighed. She looked disappointed. Disappointment. Maria Elena learned. Hurt far more than anger. It made her feel small, like a mistake that kept happening. "You're better than this," Isabella would say quietly, her eyes cold. Or at least, "You should be." Maria Elena tried harder. She folded her clothes perfectly. She cleaned without being asked. She spoke only when spoken to. Love, in her mind, became something to earn, something fragile that could vanish with a single misstep. Rosa watched the transformation with growing dread. The child she once knew, curious, bright, endlessly talkative, was fading into someone cautious and restrained. Rosa noticed how Maria Elena flinched when a glass tipped too close to the edge of the table, how she froze when something fell, how she whispered apologies even when nothing had gone wrong. Once, Rosa gently asked, "Are you afraid of something?" My dear Maria Elena smiled. It was polite, practiced, empty. "No, Rosa, I'm just being good." The answer frightened Rosa more than tears ever could. Isabella, meanwhile, was becoming impatient. Maria Elena was obedient now, but obedience was not enough. The child still existed, still occupied space in Lorenzo's heart. Still carried the shadow of a woman. Isabella could never compete with the dead wife, whose memory Lorenzo treated like something sacred. And Isabella hated ghosts. She hated the way Lorenzo's voice softened when he spoke of Elena, hated the way he kept her photograph in his study, hated that Maria Elena looked so much like her mother that sometimes it felt as if the past were watching, judging. Isabella wanted to be the only woman who mattered. Slowly, she began to tighten her grip. Meals became conditional. Praise became rare. Mistakes, however small, were remembered and revisited. Isabella never struck Maria Elena hard enough to leave obvious marks, but her fingers gripped too tightly, her nails pressed too deep. When bruises appeared, she explained them away as clumsiness, and Lorenzo believed her. Why wouldn't he? Isabella spoke calmly, reasonably. She never raised her voice. She sounded like someone who cared. Rosa, on the other hand, began to keep mental notes, dates, moments, expressions she couldn't forget. She noticed how Isabella always positioned herself between Lorenzo and Maria Elena when tensions rose, how she answered questions before the child could speak, how Maria Elena's shoulders relaxed only after her father left the room again. One evening, Rosa overheard something that made her blood run cold. "You don't need to bother your father," Isabella said, her tone soft but sharp beneath the surface. "He has important things to deal with, big problems. You wouldn't want to be the reason he's tired. Would you, Maria?" Elena shook her head quickly. "No. Good," Isabella replied. "Then remember that night." Maria Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps that never came. She hugged her pillow tightly and wondered when she had become something that needed to be managed instead of loved. Across the city, Lorenzo sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home. He stared at Elena's photograph, the familiar ache settling in his chest. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that providing security, wealth, and protection was the greatest form of love he could offer his daughter. He did not know that while he protected her from the world, someone inside his home was teaching her to fear it. The distance between father and daughter was not measured in miles or time. It was measured in silence, in things left unsaid, in a child who stopped reaching out because she believed no one would catch her. And Isabella watched it all with quiet satisfaction. The mask was working. For now. The afternoon it happened began with something almost gentle. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Moretti mansion, softening the sharp lines of wealth into something warmer, almost kind. Maria Elena sat at the coffee table in the living room, her small legs tucked beneath her, colored pencils scattered like fallen petals around her. For once, the house was quiet, not the tense, listening silence she had learned to fear, but a fragile calm that felt borrowed. Her school assignment lay open in front of her family tree. She stared at the page for a long time before touching the pencil. Drawing Papa was easy. Lorenzo's smile came naturally to her hand, solid and safe, the way she remembered him when he lifted her onto his shoulders or carried her half asleep to bed. Then came the space beside him, the one she always filled last. Her mother. Maria Elena hesitated, then chose the red pencil. Her mother had loved red dresses. She remembered the way the fabric used to swirl when Elena Moretti danced with her in the garden, laughter ringing through the air like music. The memory felt distant now, like something that belonged to another life. As she leaned forward to color, her elbow brushed the edge of the table. The glass tipped. Water spilled across the polished mahogany surface, flowing fast, unstoppable, seeping into the wood. For a heartbeat, Maria Elena simply stared. Frozen. Then panic surged through her chest, sharp and breathless. No, 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 no. She scrambled for napkins, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the spreading stain. Her mind raced ahead of her body, already anticipating the consequences. She could hear the rules in her head, clear and unforgiving. Don't make messes. Don't break things. Don't cause trouble. Footsteps echoed behind her, not Papa's. Maria Elena felt it before she turned around. The weight of the presence, the careful, unhurried rhythm. Isabella stood at the doorway, watching. For a moment, she said nothing. That silence was worse than shouting. It stretched, thick and suffocating, pressing down on Maria Elena's lungs until breathing hurt. The child dropped to her knees, scrubbing harder, tears blurring her vision. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident." Isabella stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She looked down at the stain, then at the frantic little girl, her expression unreadable. "This table," she said calmly, "is older than you." Maria Elena's hands shook. "I'll clean it, I promise. I'll use my allowance. I won't ask Papa for anything anymore." That was when Isabella laughed. It was a quiet sound, sharp and humorless, like glass cracking under pressure. "Your allowance," she repeated. "You think something so small could fix what you've ruined?" The words cut deeper than any slap. Rosa heard the laughter from the kitchen. Her heart clenched. She moved toward the living room, stopping just short of the doorway. She had seen this before, the way Isabella's voice sharpened when no one important was around. But something about this moment felt different. Heavier. Like a line about to be crossed. "You really are just like your mother," Isabella continued, her tone turning cruel. "Clumsy, weak, always making messes for other people to clean up." Maria Elena froze. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't talk about my mama." Isabella's eyes flickered with something dark and satisfied. She stepped closer, looming over the small figure on the floor. "Your mama is dead," she said softly. "Dead and gone." And do you know why Rosa's breath caught? Because even God didn't want someone so useless in this world. The words landed like a blow. Something broke inside Maria Elena. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She simply curled inward, as if trying to disappear, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. That was when Rosa knew she could no longer stay still. Her hands fumbled for her phone as she turned away, her fingers numb as she dialed Lorenzo's number. Once, twice, the call went unanswered. She tried again, her heart pounding in her ears. In the background, Isabella's voice continued cold, relentless, precise, each word stripping another layer of safety from the child. On the fourth attempt, the call connected. "Boss," Rosa whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, you need to come home. Across the city." Lorenzo straightened in his chair. Something in her tone pierced through the noise of the meeting, through the plans and threats and strategies that usually demanded his attention. He heard something else too faint, but unmistakable. The sound of a child crying without making a sound. "I'm coming," he said, already standing. Back in the mansion. Isabella finally stepped away, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened. She glanced toward the kitchen, her gaze sharp. Rosa quickly lowered her phone, her pulse racing. Maria Elena remained on the floor, staring at the stained table as if it were her fault for existing. And for the first time, Isabella made a mistake. She believed she still had time. She didn't know that somewhere on the road leading back to the mansion, a man who ruled without mercy had just heard his empire crack, not from betrayal, but from the sound of his daughter breaking in silence. Lorenzo Moretti left the meeting without explanation. The men around the table froze as he rose, his chair scraping softly against the floor. He did not raise his voice. He did not apologize. He did not look back. Those who had followed him for years recognized the expression on his face immediately, not anger, not impatience, but something far more dangerous. Focus sharpened into intent. On the drive home, the city blurred past him in streaks of steel and glass. His phone lay clenched in his hand, Rosa's words echoing again and again in his mind. "Please, you need to come home." She had sounded terrified. Rosa never panicked. Rosa had been steady through raids, arrests, whispered threats in the dark. Whatever was happening now had shaken her to the core. He tried calling back. No answer. With every mile, a cold pressure settled in his chest. He replayed the faint sounds he had heard through the phone, the uneven breathing, the muffled sobs that cut off too quickly. He told himself it could be anything. A misunderstanding, a child's tantrum, Isabella losing her patience, nothing that couldn't be smoothed over. Yet his foot pressed harder on the accelerator. At the mansion, time moved differently. Maria Elena sat where Isabella had left her, knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the darkened stain in the wood. She no longer cried. Crying required energy, and she had none left. Her thoughts drifted in slow circles, each one heavier than the last. She wondered if Papa would be angry about the table. She wondered if she should apologize again. She wondered if loving her mother had been a mistake. Isabella watched her from across the room, arms folded loosely, her expression unreadable. The moment had passed. The lesson, in her mind, had been delivered. She believed in efficiency. There was no need to prolong things. "Clean yourself up," she said coolly. "I don't want you looking like this when your father comes home." The mention of Lorenzo's return sent a tremor through Maria Elena. She rose unsteadily, her legs stiff, her movements careful. She did not meet Isabella's eyes as she walked away. Obedience had become instinct. Rosa hovered near the kitchen doorway, her heart hammering. She had tried calling again. Still nothing. The house felt suffocating, every second stretching longer than the last. She wanted to scoop Maria Elena into her arms, to tell her none of it was her fault. But fear held her in place, fear of Isabella's retaliation, fear of making things worse if Lorenzo arrived too late. Isabella moved through the house as if nothing had happened. She straightened a vase. She adjusted a cushion. She practiced her calm, her concern, her version of events. By the time the front gates opened, she was ready. The sound of Lorenzo's car pulling into the driveway cut through the silence like a blade. Maria Elena froze in the hallway. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure Isabella could hear it. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her, waiting. She did not know whether to run toward her father or stay where she was. Instinct and fear pulled her in opposite directions. The front door opened. Lorenzo stepped inside, and the house seemed to shrink around him. The familiar scent of polish and flowers felt wrong, like a mask covering rot. His eyes scanned the room instantly, sharp and searching. No laughter, no music, no sign of his daughter. "Where is she?" he asked. Isabella turned, surprise flickering across her face before smoothing into concern. "Lorenzo, you're home early. Where is Maria Elena?" The calm in his voice sent a shiver through Rosa. She stepped forward, unable to hold back any longer. She's upstairs, sir." Lorenzo didn't wait for more. He moved through the house with measured steps, each one echoing louder than the last. As he climbed the stairs, fragments of sound reached him, Isabella's voice drifting faintly from below. Too controlled, too rehearsed. The air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. At the end of the hallway, he stopped. Maria Elena stood near the wall, small and rigid, her eyes wide. When she saw him, something flickered across her face: hope, relief, fear, all tangled together. She took one hesitant step forward, then stopped. That hesitation cut deeper than any wound. "Papa," she whispered. Lorenzo dropped to one knee instantly, lowering himself to her height. His hands hovered for a moment before gently reaching for her. He took in everything at once: the stiffness in her posture, the way she avoided sudden movement, the faint redness around her wrists where small fingers had gripped too hard. "I'm here," he said softly. "It's okay." Maria Elena's composure shattered. She rushed into his arms, clinging to him with a desperation that stole the breath from his lungs. Her body shook as silent sobs racked through her, her fingers gripping his jacket as if he might disappear again. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I tried to be good. I really did." Lorenzo closed his eyes. Behind them, Isabella watched, her lips pressed together. This was not how it was supposed to go. Maria Elena was supposed to be calm, controlled, manageable. Instead, she looked broken in a way that could not be ignored. Lorenzo lifted his daughter gently, holding her close. He turned his head slightly, his gaze locking onto Isabella for the first time since he entered the house. There was no warmth in his eyes, no familiarity, only assessment. Something shifted in the room. The air grew colder, sharper. For the first time in years, Isabella felt something unfamiliar coil in her chest, uncertainty. And she realized, too late, that the silence she had cultivated so carefully was about to shatter. Lorenzo held his daughter longer than necessary. Not because he didn't trust himself to let go, but because he needed time to steady the storm rising in his chest, time to read what words could not tell him. Maria Elena's arms were locked around his neck, her small fingers curled into his jacket as if he were the last solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. She trembled even as his hands smoothed her hair, even as he whispered reassurances meant to calm her. This was not the reaction of a child who had been scolded. This was fear learned slowly, carefully, over time. "It's all right," he murmured, his voice low, controlled. "Papa's here." Maria Elena nodded against his shoulder, but she did not relax. Her body stayed tense, alert, as though waiting for permission to feel safe. That realization struck Lorenzo harder than any accusation could have. Isabella cleared her throat behind them. "Lorenzo," she said gently, the way one spoke to a man who had arrived home already irritated. "You're upsetting her. She's been emotional all afternoon." He did not turn around. "What happened?" Lorenzo asked. "Before I came home," Isabella sighed. The picture of patient exhaustion. It was nothing serious. She had an accident, spilled water on the antique table. When I tried to correct her, she became hysterical. Hysterical. The word landed wrong. Lorenzo slowly set Maria Elena down, keeping one hand on her shoulder. "Go to the kitchen," he said softly. "Rosa will make you some hot chocolate." Maria Elena hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward Isabella without her meaning to. The movement was small, almost invisible, but Lorenzo saw it. His hand tightened, just slightly. "It's okay," he told her. "Go." Rosa stepped forward immediately, her face pale, her hands shaking as she reached for the child. Maria Elena took 2 steps, then turned back. "Papa," she whispered, panic threading through her voice. "Please don't be mad. It was an accident." Lorenzo felt something inside him splinter. "I'm not mad at you," he said firmly. "Not at all." Only then did Maria Elena allow Rosa to lead her away. As the kitchen door closed behind them, the house seemed to exhale and then hold its breath. Lorenzo turned. Isabella stood near the coffee table, one hand resting lightly on its edge, the faint stain still visible beneath her fingers. She met his gaze without flinching, her posture calm, her expression carefully open. "You don't understand how difficult she can be," Isabella said. "I'm only trying to teach her responsibility. Structure. You're not here enough to see enough." The word was quiet, but it cut through the room with surgical precision. Isabella blinked, momentarily thrown. Lorenzo rarely interrupted her. He stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate. Not aggressive, measured, the way he approached negotiations that ended lives. "You said she was hysterical." He continued. "I didn't see hysteria. I saw fear." "She overreacts," Isabella replied smoothly. "Children do that. Children who feel safe," Lorenzo said. "Do not apologize for breathing." Isabella's jaw tightened, just for a fraction of a second. "She's sensitive," she said. "That's not my fault. You spoiled her after Elena died. No boundaries, no discipline. Someone had to be the adult." The name hung between them. "Elena." Lorenzo's eyes darkened. "Be careful." Isabella lifted her chin. "I'm being honest. You're blinded by guilt. You're so afraid of losing her that you refuse to see her flaws. She's 8 and already manipulative," Isabella shot back, frustration bleeding through the cracks in her composure. "She cries without tears. She knows how to look pitiful. You should have seen her before you came home. You mean when you were alone with her?" Silence followed. For the first time, Isabella hesitated. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "I'm her mother now," she said sharply, "whether you like it or not." Lorenzo stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "No," he said. "You're my wife." The correction stung. Isabella's eyes flashed. "I've sacrificed everything for this family. I run this house while you run the streets. I protect your image. I raise your child. You control her," Lorenzo replied calmly. "Those are not the same thing." Isabella laughed, the sound edged with bitterness. "You think love is enough? This world will eat her alive. I'm preparing her, by terrifying her. You call it terror. I call it strength." Lorenzo stepped closer, close enough that she had to look up at him. "Strength is not built through humiliation. You wouldn't know," Isabella snapped. You use fear every day. The accusation struck home, and Isabella knew it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Lorenzo studied her face, noting details he had once overlooked: the tightness around her mouth, the impatience beneath her elegance, the absence of warmth where it should have been. How long? He asked quietly. Has my daughter been afraid of you? Isabella's lips parted, then pressed together. She's not afraid of me. Then why? Lorenzo said, his voice deadly calm. Did she look to you before she looked to me? That question shattered something. Isabella's mask slipped, not completely, but enough. She needs to learn her place, she said coldly. She's not the center of the universe. She's the center of mine. The words fell heavy between them. Isabella stared at him, really stared. And for the first time, something like panic flickered across her face. She had underestimated this moment, underestimated what it would awaken in him. Lorenzo turned away, walking toward the window. Outside, the garden lay quiet, bathed in fading light. He spoke without looking at her. There are things you don't know about this house, he said. Things I hoped I'd never need. Isabella's breath caught. What are you talking about? Lorenzo faced her again, his expression unreadable. I'm talking about the fact, he said evenly, that this conversation isn't over. And in that instant, Isabella understood something she had never truly believed possible. Lorenzo Moretti was no longer listening to explanations. He was preparing to uncover the truth. Lorenzo did not confront Isabella again that night. That decision alone unsettled her more than any accusation could have. She expected anger, shouting, threats. She was prepared to cry, to argue, to twist the narrative until he doubted his own instincts. Instead, Lorenzo withdrew into silence, and silence had always been his most dangerous weapon. Dinner passed in strained politeness. Isabella spoke carefully, choosing neutral topics, commenting on schedules and social obligations. Lorenzo responded with short acknowledgments, his attention seemingly fixed on his plate. Only once did he look up when Maria Elena flinched as a glass clinked against the table. The movement was small, instinctive, and gone in a heartbeat. But Lorenzo saw it. He always saw it now. That night, after Isabella retired to their bedroom, Lorenzo remained in his study. The lights were low, the room thick with memories he had never dismantled. Elena's photograph sat on the desk, untouched. He stared at it for a long time, then reached into the bottom drawer and removed a thin folder he had sworn he would never need again. Inside were reports, logs, access codes. Years ago, when his enemies were closer and trust was expensive, Lorenzo had wired the house with silent safeguards audio sensors, security feeds disguised as decorative fixtures. Over time, as threats faded and life softened, he stopped checking them. The system remained, forgotten but alive. Tonight, he activated it. The first recording played was recent. Isabella's voice filled the room, calm and sharp, stripped of its social polish. Lorenzo listened without moving, his face unreadable as each word carved itself into him. Stop shaking. It's pathetic. Another clip. A different day. You're not special just because your father loves you. Another. Crying won't help you. Nothing will. The recordings were not chaotic. They were deliberate. Isabella never screamed. She never lost control. That was what made it worse. Her cruelty was measured, rehearsed, precise, designed to erode rather than explode. Lorenzo closed his eyes. Each word landed like a confession he had refused to hear for months. He recognized patterns now: the timing, the repetition, the way Isabella always struck when he was absent, when Maria Elena was most vulnerable. A final recording played. Your mother chose to die. Think about that. That was when Lorenzo stood. The chair scraped violently across the floor as he rose, one hand gripping the edge of the desk hard enough to whiten his knuckles. He did not shout. He did not curse. The rage inside him was too deep for noise. Down the hall, Isabella lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She sensed the shift in the house, the way something unseen had awakened. Lorenzo's silence gnawed at her nerves. She had built her control on predictability, and now, nothing felt predictable. She heard his footsteps approach. The bedroom door opened without warning. Isabella sat up slowly, schooling her expression into concern. Is something wrong? Lorenzo didn't answer. He crossed the room and placed his phone on the bedside table, pressing play. Her own voice filled the space between them. Isabella's breath caught. She reached for the phone instinctively, but Lorenzo's hand came down over it, stopping her. His gaze never left her face. How long, he asked. Isabella swallowed. You invaded my privacy. How long? He repeated, his voice low and even. The pause lasted a second too long. That recording doesn't show context, she said quickly. You don't understand what she's like when you're not around. Lorenzo leaned closer. Then help me understand. Isabella straightened, anger flashing through her fear. I did what you wouldn't. I disciplined her. You let guilt turn you soft. She's a child. She's a weakness, Isabella snapped. And in your world, weaknesses get destroyed. That was the moment she realized she had miscalculated. Lorenzo did not argue. He stepped back, his expression hardening into something cold and distant. Pack a bag, he said. We'll talk in the morning. Her eyes widened. You're throwing me out over a few recordings I'm protecting my daughter. You think you're innocent? Isabella laughed bitterly. You're the one who taught me fear works. Lorenzo paused at the door. He turned just enough for her to see his eyes. Fear, he said, is never supposed to live at home. He left her there, alone with the echo of her own voice. In the kitchen, Rosa sat beside Maria Elena, watching the child stir her hot chocolate absently. The girl hadn't spoken much since earlier. She leaned against Rosa now, trusting in a way that felt fragile. Rosa, Maria Elena whispered suddenly, her voice barely there. Am I bad? Rosa's heart broke cleanly in two. She pulled the child into her arms, holding her tightly. No, my angel. Never. Upstairs. Lorenzo stood in the hallway, listening through the open door, for the first time since Elena's death. He felt something clear cut through the fog of regret and denial. Purpose. Isabella believed the worst was over. She was wrong. Because Lorenzo Moretti had spent his entire life dismantling threats, quietly, patiently, until nothing was left standing. And this time, the threat had a name. Morning arrived without warmth. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Moretti mansion, touching polished floors and expensive furniture, but it could not soften the tension that had settled into the walls overnight. Isabella rose early, dressed with meticulous care, every movement deliberate. She chose a pale silk blouse, soft colors meant to suggest vulnerability. Control was her language, and appearance was its grammar. She found Lorenzo in the breakfast room. He sat alone at the long table, untouched coffee cooling beside him, his attention fixed on a folder opened before him. He did not look up when she entered. I didn't sleep, Isabella said quietly, as if confession itself were proof of sincerity. Neither did you, I assume. Lorenzo turned a page. Sit. The word was not an invitation. Isabella hesitated, then took the chair across from him. She studied his face, searching for cracks, for hesitation, for guilt she could exploit. She found none. You've had time to calm down, she said carefully. We can talk like adults now. I've been calm since last night, Lorenzo replied. That's what should worry you. She smiled faintly. You're overreacting. Children exaggerate, so do recordings. Lorenzo closed the folder and finally met her gaze. Inside were transcripts, dates, timestamps, patterns laid bare. You didn't hit her, he said. You were smarter than that. Isabella's lips tightened. You isolated her, he continued. You corrected her posture, her tone, her breathing. You taught her silence. You punished her affection. You weaponized disappointment. She needed guidance. You erased her. The accusation landed heavy between them. Isabella's composure cracked, anger bleeding through. You think love is gentle, love is discipline. Love is shaping someone so they survive. Love, Lorenzo said quietly, is safety. She laughed, sharp and humorless. Safety is an illusion. You know that better than anyone. For a moment, neither spoke. The house felt like it was listening. Where is she? Isabella asked suddenly. With Rosa, Lorenzo replied. And she won't be alone with you again. Isabella rose halfway from her seat. "You can't do this. I'm her mother." "No," he said, standing as well. "You were a caretaker. You abused the role." Her voice trembled now, whether from fury or fear she could no longer tell. "You're choosing her over me. I'm choosing her over silence." That was the end of negotiation. Later that morning, Lorenzo knelt beside Maria Elena in the garden. The roses were in bloom, their scent heavy in the air. She sat on the stone bench, her feet not quite touching the ground, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You're not in trouble," Lorenzo said gently. She nodded, though her eyes remained cautious. "I know. You don't have to be brave anymore." That was when she looked at him. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "I don't know how not to be." The confession broke something open in him. Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness he had once been afraid would make him weak. "Then we'll learn together," he said. From the balcony above, Isabella watched. The sight ignited something ugly inside her, not grief, not remorse, but jealousy. She had believed herself irreplaceable. She had believed control was love. And now, she was being cut out of the picture she had curated so carefully. She made a decision. That afternoon, while Lorenzo attended a brief meeting in his study, Isabella approached Rosa in the kitchen. Her voice softened, her expression carefully kind. "You've always cared about the child," she said. "More than you should." Rosa stiffened. "She's just a child." "And children lie," Isabella replied smoothly. "They manipulate when they feel threatened. You've seen how close she is to her father." Rosa said nothing. Isabella leaned closer. "If you repeat her fantasies, you could destroy this family. Think about that. It was a mistake." Rosa's hands shook, but her eyes hardened. "I have been thinking," she said quietly, "for years." Isabella's smile faded. By evening, Lorenzo received a call. Rosa stood in the doorway of his study, holding something small in her hands. A bracelet, child-sized. The clasp bent. "She broke it last winter," Rosa said. "Said she fell. I found it under the stairs." Lorenzo took it, his chest tightening. "There's more," Rosa continued. "I didn't speak because I was afraid. Of you, of her. But I won't be afraid anymore." She told him everything. The locked doors, the forced apologies, the nights Maria Elena slept without dinner because she misbehaved. The way Isabella watched, silent and satisfied, as the child learned to disappear. When Rosa finished, the room felt emptied of air. Lorenzo stood slowly. "Thank you," he said. "You did the right thing." Rosa nodded, tears finally falling. Upstairs, Isabella packed her things with furious precision. She moved fast, knowing time was no longer her ally. She heard footsteps in the hallway and froze. The door opened. Lorenzo stood there, the broken bracelet in his hand. "Leave," he said. "Tonight." Isabella laughed shakily. "You think this is over?" "For you," he replied. "It's just beginning." As she brushed past him, her shoulder clipped his arm. She leaned close, her voice low and venomous. "She loves you," Isabella whispered. "But she'll always remember who taught her fear." Lorenzo did not flinch. "She'll also remember," he said, "who saved her." Isabella walked out of the house with her head held high, unaware that every step she took was being watched, recorded, and measured, because love had awakened something in Lorenzo Moretti, and love, once awakened, was far more dangerous than fear. The house felt different without Isabella, not quieter. Lorenzo had known quieter homes filled with fear, but lighter, as if something poisonous had finally been removed from the air. Maria Elena noticed it first. She slept through the night without waking, her fists unclenched for the first time in years. When morning came, she wandered into the kitchen barefoot, blinking in the sunlight, surprised by the simple fact that no one was watching her every move. Lorenzo watched from the doorway, his chest tight, healing. He understood now, did not arrive in grand gestures. It crept in cautiously, testing whether it was truly safe to stay. But Isabella had not vanished. By noon, the first strike arrived not in the form of violence, but something far more calculated. Lorenzo's lawyer called with urgency. Isabella had filed a preliminary complaint, accusing him of emotional neglect, psychological instability, and an unsafe home environment for a minor. Her signature was elegant, her timing precise. She's positioning herself. The lawyer warned, custody, reputation, leverage. Lorenzo thanked him and ended the call without comment. He stood by the window, watching Maria Elena draw on the terrace with Rosa beside her. The child laughed softly when the pencil broke, a sound so fragile it felt borrowed. Isabella had underestimated one thing. She believed Lorenzo would fight like a criminal. He fought like a father. Within hours, Lorenzo activated resources he had never used for personal matters. Not intimidation, not threats. Truth, documented, time-stamped, irrefutable, recordings, witness statements. Psychological evaluations requested quietly, ethically, through professionals who owed him nothing but accuracy. Meanwhile, Isabella began her performance. She appeared in public the next evening, arm in arm with a well-known philanthropist, her expression carefully wounded. Whispers followed her through rooms filled with expensive sympathy. She spoke softly of concern, of confusion, of a husband who had grown distant and dangerous since his wife's death. People listened. They always did. That night, Maria Elena woke from a dream she could not explain. Lorenzo found her sitting up in bed, her face pale, her eyes searching. "She's coming back," the child whispered. Lorenzo sat beside her, steady and calm. "No one is coming to hurt you." Maria Elena hesitated, then asked the question she had carried alone for years. "If I tell the truth, will it make things worse?" The honesty of it cut deep. Lorenzo took her hands gently. "The truth doesn't promise ease," he said. "But it promises freedom, and I'll be there for every step." She studied his face, looking for signs of doubt. Finding none, she nodded. The next days unfolded like a chess match played in silence. Isabella's lawyers moved quickly, pushing for supervised visitation under the guise of reconciliation. Lorenzo's team responded with evidence so thorough it stunned even them. Rosa's testimony was clear. The recordings spoke without emotion. A child psychologist's early assessment noted classic signs of prolonged emotional abuse. Isabella read the report alone in her apartment, her nails digging into the paper. This was not the narrative she had planned. She decided to change tactics. One afternoon, while Maria Elena attended a private session with the psychologist, Isabella appeared unannounced at the gates of the estate. Her voice trembled convincingly as she asked to see her stepdaughter one last time. The guards hesitated. She knew they would. Lorenzo arrived moments later. He stood between Isabella and the door, his presence immovable. "You can't erase me," Isabella said, her eyes shining with practiced tears. "She loved me once." Lorenzo's voice was calm. "She trusted you. That's not the same thing. It should have been." Isabella's composure finally cracked. "You think you've won? The world still believes me. She's just a child." Lorenzo leaned closer, his words low and precise. "Children grow, and memories don't disappear just because you tell a better story." Isabella searched his face, then smiled slowly. "Then we'll see who she believes when she's older." That night, Maria Elena asked to sleep in Lorenzo's room. He did not hesitate. She curled beside him, clutching the edge of his shirt, as if afraid he might vanish. "Papa," she whispered, "I remembered something." He waited. "She used to say that you wouldn't choose me if you knew the truth." Lorenzo closed his eyes. "She was wrong," he said. Maria Elena's fingers tightened. "I know." Those two words marked a shift neither of them fully understood yet. Across the city, Isabella sat alone, scrolling through messages that no longer arrived. Invitations slowed, sympathy cooled, doubt had entered the room. And once doubt appeared, it never left quietly. She poured herself a drink, staring at her reflection. For the first time, Isabella realized the truth she had avoided all along. She had mistaken silence for victory, and the war she had started was no longer under her control, because the most dangerous thing she had done was teach a child how to survive, and that child had finally chosen to speak. The courtroom was quieter than Maria Elena had imagined. Not silent, there were papers shifting, restrained coughs, the distant hum of the city beyond thick glass, but quieter in the way storms sometimes paused before breaking. She sat between Lorenzo and Rosa, her feet dangling slightly above the floor, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had chosen the dress herself, pale blue, soft, something that belonged to her, not to anyone else's expectations. Lorenzo watched her from the corner of his eye, his posture steady, his presence anchored entirely to her. He did not coach her. He did not rehearse answers. He had promised her one thing, only whatever she said would be enough. Across the room, Isabella sat composed, elegant as ever. Her hair was flawless, her expression carefully wounded. She avoided looking at the child. That alone said more than words. When Maria Elena's name was called, the room shifted. Lorenzo stood first, instinctively, then stopped himself. He caught her eye. She nodded. "I can do it," she whispered. He believed her. Maria Elena walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. The chair felt too large when she sat, but she straightened her back the way Rosa had taught her, not out of fear, but pride. The judge spoke gently. Questions came softly, without pressure. Maria Elena answered at first with careful simplicity. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "She told me I was difficult," Maria Elena said. "That my father would leave if I wasn't good." Isabella shifted. "She made me stand still for a long time." The child continued. "If I cried. She said it proved I was weak." Lorenzo's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. The room listened. "I stopped crying," Maria Elena said, "because crying didn't help. There it was, not drama, not accusation, just truth, laid bare." When the questioning ended, Maria Elena looked toward her father. He nodded once, slow and proud. She returned to her seat, her legs shaking only after it was over. Rosa wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Isabella's testimony followed. She spoke of misunderstanding, of stress, of a child who needed structure, of a husband consumed by grief and power. Her words were polished, controlled, persuasive, but something had changed. The room no longer leaned toward her. The decision did not come immediately. Court rarely offered instant closure. But when they stepped outside into the afternoon light, Lorenzo felt something loosen in his chest for the first time in years. They had been heard. Days passed, then weeks. The ruling arrived on a quiet morning. Full custody to Lorenzo. No visitation without long-term evaluation and court approval. Maria Elena read the letter twice, her fingers tracing the words as if afraid they might disappear. Then she looked up. "Does this mean—" she asked carefully. "She can't come back." "Yes," Lorenzo said softly. "It means you're safe." The words settled into her slowly, like a language she was still learning. Life did not transform overnight. Healing never did. There were moments when Maria Elena startled at raised voices, when shadows lingered too long in her dreams. But now, when fear appeared, it did not rule. Lorenzo changed too. He stopped coming home late. Meetings shortened. Priorities rearranged themselves around something infinitely more fragile and precious than power. He learned how to listen without fixing, how to sit in silence without demanding strength. Some evenings, he read to Maria Elena until she fell asleep halfway through a sentence. Other nights, they talked about Elena, her laugh, her kindness, the way she used to hum while cooking. The name no longer hurt the way it once had. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, Maria Elena stopped near the rose bushes. "She would have liked it here," she said. Lorenzo swallowed. "Yes, she would have." Maria Elena slipped her hand into his. It was a small gesture. It felt like forgiveness. Across the city, Isabella watched her world shrink. Calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. The narrative she had built collapsed under the weight of documented truth. She told herself she had lost because she had been too gentle, but deep down, she knew better. She had lost because fear could not survive exposure. One evening, months later, Lorenzo hosted a small dinner. No extravagance, just warmth. Rosa sat at the table, laughing freely. Maria Elena told a story from school, her hands animated, her voice bright. She laughed loudly without apology. Lorenzo watched her, his chest full. Later, As he tucked her into bed, she asked him something unexpected. "Papa," she said, her voice drowsy, "was I ever really bad?" He brushed her hair back gently. "No, you were never bad. You were hurt." She considered that, then smiled faintly. "I think I'm getting better. I know you are." As the lights dimmed and the house settled into quiet, Lorenzo stood for a moment in the doorway. He understood now that happy endings were not explosions of joy. They were choices. Daily, intentional, earned. And somewhere in that stillness, fear finally loosened its grip. Not because it had been destroyed, but because it no longer ruled the story. Spring arrived quietly, not with grand announcements or dramatic change, but with subtle insistence, warm light spilling through open windows, birds returning to the garden, roses blooming without being told when or how. The Moretti house adjusted slowly, as if learning a new rhythm after years of holding its breath. Maria Elena was the first to change in ways that could not be ignored. She began to run. At first, only in the garden, barefoot on the grass, laughing in short bursts as if unsure whether joy was allowed to stay. Then one morning, she ran through the halls of the house, her footsteps light and unafraid. Rosa watched from the kitchen doorway, pressing a hand to her chest, tears forming without warning. Lorenzo heard the laughter from his study. He closed the folder in front of him, contracts, meetings, obligations that once defined him, and stood. Power no longer felt heavy when it no longer came first. Later that afternoon, Lorenzo and Maria Elena sat on the terrace, painting together. Not because it was therapeutic or recommended, but because Maria Elena had asked. "Don't make it perfect," she told him seriously, dabbing blue where it didn't belong. "I wasn't planning to," Lorenzo replied. She smiled. A real one, unpracticed, unafraid. That was when he understood something essential. Healing was not the absence of scars. It was the absence of fear around them. Maria Elena still remembered. She always would. But memory had lost its claws. That evening, Lorenzo received a letter. Isabella's name stared up at him from the page. He didn't open it immediately. When he finally did, the words inside were sharp, controlled, and full of blame. She accused him of turning their world against her, of manipulation, of theft of a child she claimed had once loved her. Lorenzo folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then he locked it away. Some stories did not deserve continuation. In the weeks that followed, life reshaped itself into something quieter and truer. Maria Elena started school without fear of mistakes. She raised her hand even when unsure. She cried once in class and did not apologize for it. When she came home and told Lorenzo, her voice shook not with shame, but pride. "I didn't stop it," she said. "The crying." Lorenzo pulled her into his arms. "I'm glad." One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the house gold, Maria Elena stood in front of Elena's photograph. "I miss her," she said softly. "I know," Lorenzo replied. "She wouldn't like the shouting," Maria Elena added thoughtfully, "but she'd like the garden now." "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "She would—" Maria Elena took his hand. "I think she'd be happy." The words healed something old and deep. Time passed, not erasing, but transforming. The house filled with sound again. Music returned. Friends visited. Laughter lingered without fear of consequence. Rosa no longer whispered. Lorenzo no longer watched doors like enemies. One night, months later, Maria Elena asked to sleep alone. "I want to try," she said. Lorenzo hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be right here." She slept through the night. In the morning, she ran to him, triumphant. "I did it." He laughed, lifting her off the ground. "You did." That was the moment Lorenzo understood the true shape of a happy ending. It was not revenge, not victory. It was safety. Across the city, Isabella faded into irrelevance. Her name appeared less often. Her voice lost its audience. She told herself she had been misunderstood. But somewhere, in the quiet she could no longer escape. She knew the truth. Fear had failed her. Back at the house, spring turned to summer. One afternoon, Maria Elena lay in the grass, staring at the sky. "Papa," she said lazily, Do you think people can start over? Lorenzo lay beside her. I think some people are braver than they realize. She turned her head, studying him. You are. He smiled. So are you. Maria Elena closed her eyes. Content. The Moretti house stood strong, not because it was protected by power or silence, but because it was finally built on something unbreakable. Trust, love, and the simple, extraordinary truth that fear does not get the final word. This time, the story ended not with shadows, but with light.